our call today. So as we slowly gather our attendees for the day, I think we're going to start in to make the best use of time. We have a very robust agenda. So welcome all to the Gravity Project public call September 3rd. Here we go. Thank you for joining the meeting. Again, due to the large number of attendees, everyone's muted upon entry. And we ask that you keep yourself muted in order to avoid background noise. The call is recorded and is always available on the Gravity Confluence page after the meeting. And as anyone who's been in past meetings knows, there is a very lively chat conversation usually throughout the meeting, and I work pretty hard to make sure that those comments in the chat are integrated into the conversation. So please send chats to everyone if you are going to be talking to everybody. All right, next slide, please. This is just a general slide we present every single time regarding our antitrust practices. Next slide, please. This is our call to participation. So if you are just joining the call for the first time and you've not already joined the project officially, we encourage all members of our calls to officially join the project by following the Confluence. If you want to check whether you've already signed up or if others from your organization have signed up, you can do that at this next link. And then the Confluence is a robust sea of information regarding the project. I do want to state that one of the things we're talking about today is our first consensus voting process in a bit. You do need to be an official member to vote. So joining the project as an official member is key to some of the action items in our call today. Next slide, please. These are some of our many project funders and in-kind supports to date. Next slide, please. We always are welcome to have organizations join our list of sponsors and funders. We recognize all of our contributors to the work. If you are interested in learning more about sponsoring, you can send an email to the general Gravity Project email. There's also a special page on the Confluence with information about sponsorship. Next slide, please. We do have social media presence now, both on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Let folks know. Next slide, please. And then Evelyn, do you want to take this over?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Evelyn Gallego, Program Manager. I'm happy just to tee up for those that may have not seen the announcement. We will be talking further about the Connectathon and the second part of our meeting today when we'll have Bob Dieterle speak to the updates with the fire implementation guide. But this is important for all in case you will drop off before 5 o'clock. Next week is the HL7 Fire Connectathon, scheduled from September 9th to 11th. Gravity will be testing the 10th and the 11th. The 9th is really an overall kickoff for HL7. So if you are interested in the track and testing what's being developed, we invite you to sign up as a participant. There is a fee. There is a $250 registration fee under HL7 to participate. It's $350 if you are not an HL7 member, but that is part of, and that is not a Gravity cost. This is an HL7 to host this. This is a virtual Connectathon. They're always done in person. If you have any questions, please reach out to the track leads that are listed on the track page. And I'm hearing some background noise. Next slide, please. We also have, for those that are joining us for the first time, we have a call for participation from the Office of the National Coordinator to submit data concepts or data classes for the U.S. Core for Data Interoperability. There is an opportunity for us to submit under the Gravity project the food insecurity data elements that we've completed to date. And we, of course, if you are interested in submitting with the Gravity project, we are putting a letter as an attachment where we will list the names of our membership that would like to be added. So if you do want to be added to this letter, please email us at our inbox. Next slide. since we have so much, I'm going to go quickly. I know we've got a lot to cover today, but for those aware, HHS has an SDOH COVID site. Please visit it if you want to follow. Next slide. ACL Challenge Grant. This is ongoing till December 14th. We'll always include it here because this contains a component, a requirement for those that apply for the grant to test the gravity standards. Testing will occur next year once the challenge grants are awarded, but it is very specific. It is around promoting the adoption of the gravity identified standards. Next slide. And then quickly, this came out fresh off the press this week, ONC is holding another SDOH workshop. They've had several upstage focus areas this year. So we really appreciate the interest in social determinants of health. So there is a workshop September 21. It's free. Please register. We'll have a gravity presentation. Next slide. And then I'll hand over to Sarah. I think we had both to go on just introducing our very busy schedule for today.
I know. We definitely, so Lucy's asking to post a link in the chat for the letter.
Yeah, please email us.
So Lucy, I think if you can help us by direct email, that probably is a better way to go about it because there's a fair bit of work on there. Oh, and also, yes. Okay, we will. If we can post direct links into the chat with those with the activities beyond the letter, that'd be helpful. So our agenda for the day is again very robust. So Evelyn went through some announcements. I'll go through a project schedule and terminology approach elements. Evelyn has the luck of introducing our amazing new project manager, and then we will discuss the final end-to-end review adjustments for housing instability and homelessness. Evelyn will kick us off with the things we need to know for consensus voting on our final data set for housing instability and homelessness. I'll do a brief update on adequate housing, taking very little time. Then same thing for transportation pre-work. Both of these are just in building the data set phase. And then we will try to close out at the top of the hour with an introduction of the gravity principles, which are now available on the Confluence and ready for your review. And then Bob will take us out, and we're carrying into that extra half hour that we build into our time to talk about the gravity technology direction and elements to consider for the Connectathon next week, and homework and the next steps. Busy. All right, so getting right into it. Next, please. You recognize these slides. This is where we kind of orient ourselves. We are in September 3rd. We are completing the Housing Instability and Homelessness Consensus data set and beginning voting. We are in the brainstorming phase of the inadequate housing data set and the pre-work of the transportation data set. So homework is on the right column there, submitting your vote for the Housing Instability and Homelessness data set, submitting concepts for both transportation and inadequate housing. Next slide, please. This is our grounding slide again, which shows just the way the two different elements of work interact. So we have on one side the SDOH domain work or terminology building, on the other side the technical work of FHIR and how they interact in the center through coded value sets. Next slide, please. This is, I pulled to the top again. This is one of the slides that we always include at the end of our presentations, but we're adding a new element today, which is the voting. So I just wanted to remind folks of what we do in the terminology development world. So the steps of terminology development are creating an initial master set through the Siren Compendium and SDOH terminology searches. Then we collectively brainstorm to create a new master list. We then refine it, massage it, conceptualize it, adjudicate it until we get this final set that collectively as a community we're content with, and then we go into the voting phase. And that's where we are now with one of our domains, housing instability and homelessness. Next slide, please. I'm in the process of building kind of a legend to help any member figure out where we are, because as you can see, the domains are piling on top of each other. So we don't stop work on a domain. We just carry forward and start working on new domains and then adding labor. And so right now for a legend in process, you can see for every domain, there's pre-work to be done, brainstorming, reviewing, voting, building, and then my dear friend Greg Bloom noted that we probably should have a test and evaluate section, which I'm very grateful for. We'll add those soon. And then you can see that there's this loop back. So this process is not linear. We always are going back and refining the things that we are submitting through the build process and through the testing process. So as we go forward through the slides, you'll see these little icons on each of the different domains, so you can orient yourself to where we are in each of those domains process towards being fully built into terminology. Next slide, please. Any questions on that initial work? So again, these are kind of like meta orientation slides before we carry into the work of the day.
Sarah, is it possible to imagine a pilot phase for everything we do? Is that feasible from the project management point of view? Is it possible that grant funds would cover that sort of thing? Because introducing uniform language is a wonderful exercise and it's very gratifying when it gets published, but that doesn't mean that anybody picks it up. So I'm wondering whether a pilot phase is an idea.
Yes. So I can I can safely say that one of the things that we're thinking about in Gravity is how to synthesize the communities of implementers and testers, all of our friends and colleagues that we have in the country doing this work. And so that definitely, how best to do that is definitely something we think about a lot right now, and that is very heavily on our minds. So there's a lot of energy to take these things that we're suggesting abstractly and put them in practice. So absolutely, Lucy, you're fairly clairvoyant about these things. So yes and yes. Any other questions?
Sarah, I can answer from a program management perspective that yes, the next phase of work will have to be pilot. So that's just all initiatives go through that phase. But as Sarah noted, we are in the planning. We have to kick off pilots next year. So as we go through as a fire, so I'll be speaking with my HL7 hat on, all the fire accelerators, the work is to develop the standards for testing at connectathons, but have them readily available for pilots and implementations. This is where we need community involvement, but we're in the process of finding the right funding streams, right, sponsors to support this. So I mentioned the ACL Challenge Grant. So if you missed that part, the ACL Challenge Grant is meant to support the pilots. The grants are to give technology vendors funding so they can test these standards in the field. So that's an example of pilots that will kick off under the Administration of Community Living, and they're scheduled for next year. Thanks. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Evelyn. Any other questions out there before we get into the next slides? Thank you, Lucy, for asking important questions as always. Next slide, please. Evelyn, over to you.
Great. So thank you very much, everyone. I think we've had, I do want to acknowledge that we initially announced our call for resumes, for references for project manager to join the Gravity Project as we continue to grow. We have a lot going on and a lot planned for even the fall this year and next year. And we really needed someone to come on board to help us coordinate all these activities, as well as we just transition into a new governance structure. So I do want to acknowledge that we received a wealth of resumes through our process, through the Gravity listserv, through our Confluence page, through word of mouth. And so I'm delighted, if we moved on to the next slide, to introduce our new project manager, Carrie Lewisberg. So Carrie is on the phone today. You will hear her voice, and she's onboarding. She just started this week, so we're trying to be gentle on her as she comes on board. But I do want to recognize that we've officially had her, and she accepted to join our project. And so you will be hearing her name, and most likely you will hear her speak in coming coming meetings because she will be coordinating all of us. So just a bit, here's just a bit about Carrie and her experience. She is a PMP and Scrum project management professional. I know what this is, acronyms. A wealth of experience with health systems, most recently with Catholic Health Initiatives, that is now Common Spirit, a joint a merger now, I guess, with Dignity Health. And then her background in psychology and business background. And of course, she's with us from Colorado today. So Carrie, just not to put you on the spot, just say hello to everyone and so they could hear your voice in upcoming meetings. Or no, it's you in upcoming meetings. Carrie, are you on? Or I know she was having trouble with her audio. She may be on mute. Oh, she's still on mute.
Hi, this is Carrie. Nice to meet all of you. I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, all right, so a little bit about Carrie and then back to you, Sarah. I can't remember if it's next one is back to you, but thanks for the opportunity to introduce her.
Oh, yes, of course. So now is the final presentation on the action items from the end-to-end review process of our housing instability and homelessness decisions. So these are all the elements we had to reconcile from our community conversations, from emailed comments, from submission comments. So a few last pearls before we go into the consensus voting process. Next slide, please. These are all, it's a fairly up-to-date version of the organizations that submitted. I do want to say we don't necessarily capture here all of the comments in the chat and all the conversations we've had. There's many phone conversations that built this data set. And we kept a log of those submissions, but those individuals are not necessarily on here. We'll try to get that all up to date in the next weeks and months so everyone can see that on the Confluence. Next slide, please. As you can see here, so a total review of total receipt of 18 submissions. Again, that's an underestimation just based on how much creative brainstorming and ad hoc submissions there was, and Linda had to organize all that. But we came out with this final, we reviewed 15, returned 17 to submitters, and then the master set stands as it does, and it will be available on the Confluence very shortly. Next slide, please. These are key updates. So the Healthy People 2030 goals just came out, and one of those goals was aligned with our current domain. So we felt like we needed to have a response to the Healthy People 2030 goals that encapsulated the aim. So the goal was in Healthy People 2030 to reduce the percent of those living with housing cost burden, which is defined as greater than 30%. What folks might remember is our current problem or diagnosis was only for severe housing cost burden. So in order to encapsulate and measure progress toward the greater concept of all housing cost burden, which is 30% or greater, we're adding a general code of housing instability housed housing cost burden. This will allow us then to make progress towards the goals in line with Healthy People 2030. And I just want to note again, the severe housing cost burden will, of course, remain. Next slide, please. So this is in response to some of the work we were doing on goal setting, triggered largely by our dear friend, Lucy Johns. We're grateful for you. I've spent a lot of time talking to folks in the harm reduction world in order to encapsulate this next goal, which is really trying to understand how to represent individuals that don't necessarily want things to change. A lot of our goals that we had in our goals section were all about changing location or like moving to a new house or moving from sheltered to unsheltered, moving from unsheltered to sheltered homelessness. But there wasn't really a way to represent the subtlety of folks that wanted small changes or nothing to change at all. So the output of those conversations that we present to the community for voting is safe sleeping, which would be cover remaining in unsheltered homelessness, but doing so with improved safety. Stabilize housing, which includes remaining in current housing, but with improved stability. And stay as I am. As much as we tried to find a different way to encapsulate that, all of the harm reduction folks that I talked to decided that that really was just about going to cover it and to see what the community thought. Yes, is burdened officially 30% of income spent on housing? Yes. Yes, it is. And then severe is 50% or greater. Again, so this is, I'm just responding to comments in the chat. So this is the this is the proposal from those last elements we were searching for goals in order to represent the subtlety of folks who just wanted small changes or perhaps no change at all. Next slide, please. New programs within the intervention category that are important to note. We've added Area Agency on Aging, which we've needed to add for some time. We added community development financial institutions, mortgage assistance, foreclosure prevention assistance, and a healthcare program for the homeless code. Each of these we worked on with our federal partners when able to make sure was in line with federal definitions. You'll find each of these programs as defined on the program definition page, which is the first tab of the master. One note that so late breaking is we neglected to include community CDCs or community development corporations. So we are going to be suggesting the SMEs and I will add that latent breaking and we'll integrate that into the master. Next slide, please. I think that's it. And then for Lucy's benefit and for the team's benefit, I updated our little word cloud with all of the final problems and diagnoses. So those subtle changes are the final tweaks to the housing instability and homelessness master set that we have collectively crafted over the last 3 months together. Good work, team. It's quite an accomplishment. It's really quite lovely and robust. There might be some subtle definition change, definition additions to the diagnoses to come, but it's just a lovely bit of work, and I'm very grateful for all of your effort. I believe, next slide, please, that we go now into the discussion of how to vote on this collective work, and I believe Evelyn is taking that over.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, next slide. So for those not familiar with voting, we've held consensus voting for all the artifacts we developed through the Gravity Project, and it aligns very much with the HL7 process, so of being able to review and have open debate and validation of the deliverables. So why is this important? So this is something we included, found a visual about achieving consensus. So it relies on due process to allow equity and fairness. So as we present something back to you, even though you've had an opportunity to review and of course inform what gets there, we do need a final vote and affirmation that what we have developed as a community, as a collaborative, is the right thing to move forward with in developing a new standard. So the consensus process that we've adopted supports the open participation, a balance of interest and equal opportunity for all participants without any dominant positions. And consensus voting provides the opportunity to address all views and resolve any objections so an agreement can be reached. Next slide. So what does this mean for housing instability and homelessness data set, or the master list? So we today officially open it up for voting. You've all been, again, if you've been following us for the last few months, we started housing, I can't believe it, we started housing in March. We are now ready to vote on it. So what does voting consist of? Voting, so there's a link there on the Confluence where we have the voting page ready to go. It actually has a link to the latest master list for you to download and review. And you also have a form. So all we need from you are the votes. either yes, yes with comment, a formal objection, or an abstain. I do want to remind everyone that only committed members can vote. Right now, I think we're at close to 600. I need to tally them, but we have a large number of Gravity members that have signed up as committed members. Of course, there's more that have signed up as other interested party. So if you are a committed member, we strongly encourage you to submit your vote. If you don't feel you have been involved and don't feel as a committed member, you can as well, your vote counts as an abstain, right? Where you're not ready to vote on something. Please do vote, or else we'll be reaching out to you until we reach a quorum. We'll need to have at least 50% of our committed members vote. And of course, have a passing vote. If you are an other interested party and you've been involved in this process for the last couple of months and weeks and would like to change your status, please send us a note. Just send us again to the Gravity email, gravityproject@emiadvisors.net. Send it to us. You can also change your status on when you go to this link. It also prompts you, if you're not a committed member, it will prompt you to sign up. If you do, and even so, if you're an other committed member or other interested party and you vote, when we review it, we'll check your membership and get back to you. So we will do that due diligence as well, and to make sure you are listed as a committed member. So I'll pause there. Any questions from the community? Okay.
So this is, oh, sorry, this is Sarah. I just wanted to mention, based on the late breaking changes in the master, I just do want to so Linda, have we yet to upload the Confluence, the new master to the Confluence voting page? I think we need to give ourselves a time frame.
Yeah, no, we haven't yet. And I've made the changes up through this one.
Okay, fantastic. So let's just give everyone a time frame that by noon tomorrow, because we do want to give our Confluence wizard, Marissa, time to upload the brand new final master set, because I literally was just sending changes to Linda right before this meeting. So if everyone can start tomorrow at noon, we promise to have the master that's linked to the voting page and on the Housing Instability and Homelessness Confluence page be the final all hands on deck version.
Great.
Yeah, and then just one more comment. I neglected to once again thank the amazing folk at Children's Health Watch who have put in many, many hours of subject matter expertise and adjudication over the course of these 3 months. Allison and Richard, just so grateful, and to the whole team at Children's Health Watch for your expertise in the social risk realm and medical and social care integration. You are priceless, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just conclude by we are reminding everyone that once this becomes available, so please do, if you're listening right now, pause. Don't start voting right away. Wait till tomorrow noon. But we're giving you 2 weeks, so please do submit, and we'll send reminders to you as well, especially our committed members, to vote within the dedicated time frame. So that's it. So thank you, Sarah. Back to you.
Thank you all. Yes, so we have one little comment here from Denise, which is important to note. Safe sleep is a concept of safe dyad sleeping with infants, especially who are breastfeeding. We are aware of that. This is the family medicine person in me is aware of that and grateful for WIC. Safe sleeping, we hope that the definitions and use cases will be different enough, but we do acknowledge the complexity that safe sleeping was enough of a term in use for this use case. We decided to proceed, but if we have issues in implementation and piloting and testing, we can always come back and revisit it. And thank you so much for noting that. All right, so this is going to be very, very quick. Again, the the gathering of data phase. This is where we are with inadequate housing data concepts and submissions. So we're in the brainstorming. Next slide, please. This number of submissions is smaller than it actually is. So much of what's come into the inadequate housing data elements has come through other submissions, previous submissions, collated work. The master grows. It still needs a lot of work though. Next slide, please. Again, we're really trying to focus on the goals of care and interventions. I think we're pretty set and solid. It feels good in the screening tools, assessments, and diagnoses. We did get some really wonderful submissions for interventions recently. But again, beat the ground if you can on inadequate housing and housing quality, or as we're calling it, substandard housing. Goals of care and interventions. And if you're submitting interventions, remember, we would love the definitions of the programs you're submitting as part of that submission. And again, if you have anybody you feel like we can talk to who's an expert on the ground, just send us an email and we'd love to talk with them. Next slide, please.
Sarah,
Yes, hello?
could you remind us whether the language that we have developed so far and ultimately the codes that come out of it will take account of eviction, pending eviction, eviction due to COVID, insecurity? This whole realm is not going away soon. And it's really on the front burner in a lot of places in the country, including on the president's desk, dare I say. So does that come up in here somewhere?
Yes, and so because of time, I didn't show again the final slide for our housing instability and homeless work, but we did elect to specifically have an at-risk of eviction terminology, a term to cover just that risk. So there's a couple different concepts in the housing instability and homelessness data suggestions, which will definitely give us more granularity and capacity to evaluate this very present crisis. So
great, thank you.
Yeah. And this is just a repeat. So yes, we're still working for interventions for inadequate housing. Next slide, please. Let's just move through these fairly quickly because we do want to get to the next slide. So this is just a visual on the process of brainstorming. So if you are thinking of submitting inadequate housing concepts, just remember we try to think about what language means from all different kinds of locations. We try to take off our clinical hat, put on our community-based organization hat, or our government hat, or our hospital system hat. And especially, we always try to make sure we keep the perspective of the patient or the client and the person at the center of all we do. Next slide, please. Any questions on inadequate housing? Really, it's just about all submitting concepts. So we have a little while longer for our hard and fast just data brainstorming work, and then we'll start end-to-end review very shortly. And then going into the end-to-end review process once we start our other domains. So just send us all the concepts you possibly can. Next slide, please. Transportation pre-work, it's actually very similar to the work we're doing in adequate housing because we're both just trying to acquire concepts. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, our next meeting is the kickoff for the transportation insecurity domain. So just a reminder, we have our wonderful subject matter experts of Alexandra King and Jennifer Sisto-Gall. They are gathering some of their colleagues in the research world, so we're very grateful for that. We do want to encourage anyone prior to starting the transportation domain to submit transportation concepts. A special thank you to our fellows, Jen and Fung from Cambia Grove, who are doing amazing work to gather an initial data set based on, again, gleaning concepts from the compendium, doing independent terminology searches, and gleaning approaches from the research and the lit. So hopefully once we start next meeting, we have a really robust set of concepts to digest as a community. And again, thank you very much, Jen and Fung. Next slide, please. Any questions there about transportation? All right, moving right along. I'm just going to stop for 1 second. So far we've covered a lot. And before I move into a little bit of a shift, I just want to remind folks what we've done so far. So for housing instability and homelessness, we reviewed the final changes that came out of our end-to-end review process. Those changes are so last minute that they have yet to be moved onto the Confluence, even though they're part of our live growing master set that we share as we do our work. So that will happen in order for you to do the vote tomorrow. Again, so we reviewed those final housing instability and homelessness concepts. We discussed the next work with that domain, which is to vote collectively on that master set that we made together. And again, the link is in the chat and the link is on the Confluence. All committed members can vote. If you're not a committed member and want to jumpstart your voting capacity, you can email us or you can join on the Confluence. Then we went into our inadequate housing work, which is still in the gathering concepts phase. So the key there is to submit any concepts for transportation that you might have. And if you want to connect us with individuals who can help us in that work, please let us know. Then we talked about the kickoff, right? So transportation insecurity begins in 2 weeks at the next meeting. We are in active collation phase for that work as well. Again, if you have any concepts you want to submit, please do so. If you have any resources for us to read, please send them. And so we can hit the ground running on the 17th with a good master set in hand. Now we're taking a slight tack. It's still a review element, but in March, at the beginning of the housing insecurity and homelessness work, we talked about a need to have principles to guide our work because of the complexity and risk of evaluating social risk in clinical settings and sharing information amongst clinical settings and in between community and clinical settings. So what are the particular principles to be considered in the realm of social risk and interoperability? We would like to present that work that has been happening through committee structure and through committee brainstorming back to the community for review at this time. And we're looking forward to hearing your comments on it. Next slide, please. So the work of the principles was largely done through an ongoing seminar among the Gravity Technical Advisory Committee, of which I'm lucky to be a part of. The principles started through some existing principles that have been utilized in California, and we're very grateful for Mark Savage bringing those forward. And then they were basically winnowed and refined and evaluated in the same way that we do the data set development work. So over the course of those, of the last few months, we created a new name for it, the Principles of Data Exchange for Equitable Health and Social Care. We winnowed them down to a kind of a core list of the things that we need to consider. And we created a spot on the Confluence for you to review them. So the goal is akin to our terminology development end-to-end process work. Prior to our next call, we want you to send any comments to gravityprojectemiadvisors.net so that we can digest those comments and try to integrate them into the work. Next slide, please. I just want to highlight here what the meta principles are that we came up with. Really, thank you to Greg Bloom, who took the helms, took the helm at trying to shape this, and then gave us something for the community to digest. So thank you, Greg. So we have 6 core principles we're presenting as guiding our work and grounding our work. 1 is improving personal health outcomes. 2 is improving population health equity. 3 is ensuring personal control. 4 is designing appropriate solutions. 5 is ensuring accountability. And 6 importantly, is preventing, reducing, and remediating harm. Again, they're on the Confluence now. We are really eager to hear your feedback. The TAC worked really hard to get it to a point where we felt like it was ready for the community to digest it, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And again, just send an email if you can to the Gravity Project email before the next call, and really just so thankful for the TAC for this really thoughtful work. It's really quite an accomplishment, and we're grateful for them. We look forward to having the whole community weigh in. Any questions on that process? Well, we really look forward to having your questions and thoughts via email once you guys get your eyes on it. Thank you so much. There's a lot of homework that we're assigning to you all, and we're so grateful for the collective community. Next slide, please. And now I have the honor of passing off the remainder of the calls. Is Bob on the call?
Not yet.
Not yet. So he probably is going to join in the next 10 minutes or so. So given the fact that we said that he was going to start the agenda at the top of the hour, and we finished a lot sooner than I thought we would, are there any questions or comments on what we've done so far that I can help answer? Anything we want to revisit from the previous presentation? I love that it's, no comments. Should we any concerns or on the housing instability and homelessness work, or the directives from the inadequate housing and transportation work? No.
Any questions on consensus voting?
Wow, maybe we're getting our community down. Maybe this is what we do now, so there's less questions. I think what we can do, because the initial slides are actually slides that describe our next approach, I might save Bob a little time and just start presenting on those to spare, just to keep on going. And then maybe Bob can join and talk about the specific work of the Connect-a-thon when he arrives. Next slide, please. This is just a review of the Gravity Project deliverables as it stands. So we have our first deliverable was our, and Evelyn, do you feel like this is okay for me just to start diving in?
Sure, yeah, these are the general context setting, and I just pinged him. So he may not join until 5, either way,
Yes.
but you can set the context, and because we may have some of the fire interested parties also join us at 5.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the fire stuff until Bob arrives. But our general project deliverables are first our use cases, and then the creation of common data elements. That is what we do here, and then the associated domains that are linked to those data elements. And then our next work is the fire implementation guide, which includes the framework. And then,
Hi, this is Bob.
Hi, Bob. Welcome.
I've been on from the beginning. For some reason, you couldn't hear me, so I called back in.
Oh, lovely. Well, I was trying to not incredibly well fill your shoes. So I would love to pass the torch, and then understanding, I do hope that we're going to be close to 5 when we start about the Connect-a-thon work. So that's going to be lovely. So welcome, Bob Didderly. He's the technical director, and he's going to take over. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarah. So what I'd like to do is walk all of you through some of the changes we have made in the technical approach with the fire implementation guide based on the acceleration of the work that Sarah is doing in trying to go and define the survey assessment portion of each of these domains so that we can have a complete set of in particular, codes related to surveys and a process that we can use going forward. We're also turning around and taking the general, and you'll see this as we go through it, the general approach to the implementation guide, and rather than focusing it on a single domain, focusing it on any number of domains, meaning make it domain agnostic and be able to use it not only for the work that we're doing in Gravity here, but also have others use it when they have particular assessment tools that they want to use and bring it together as a approach to going and managing and making available social determinative health information. So that's kind of the overview. Let me walk through this. In general, what we have for Gravity or for deliverables are the use cases that we have put together. We're expanding that number. We'll talk about that in a second. The common data elements, associated concepts. We have the coded information, the ability to capture it, group it, make recommendations, and then in particular around the FHIR implementation guide, the framework work we're doing now, and particular focus on surveys, coding, diagnosis, and aggregation. We're also adding in something that we have had on the plate for a while, but haven't attempted to start, and that's a reference implementation that anyone that's involved in the Gravity work, the technology side of it, can use as a way to go and test their own developments, and the ability to go and use that code as starting point for development that they may themselves wish to do. Next slide, please. As you know, we have identified, or Siren has identified, 19 different social risk domains. These aren't the only possible ones, but these are the ones that we have been talking about from the beginning of the Gravity work. Next slide, please. We have initially identified 3 areas to focus the Gravity effort on. One is on food insecurity or hunger. The second one is on housing, which is what you're landing now. The hunger is, food insecurity is completed. And then starting transportation. Now, that's fine if that's all you're concerned about. If you're trying to go and assess an individual's issues related to social determinants of health, then you need something broader than just those 3. And what we've basically had as feedback is the community doesn't want to wait for several years to go and be able to go and assess the issues related to the broader set of domains. Next slide, please. So we've established kind of this process, or you have established it, the ability to do screenings or assessment, the ability to go to diagnosis, to have goal setting and interventions as the primary, shall we say, work loop that exists as we start to think in terms of assessing issues and dealing with them. Next slide, please. The issue we had is in focusing on one domain at a time and running it end to end is that we wind up with a situation where while we do very comprehensive work, we don't have the ability to create a broad enough set of survey support, survey instrument support, that we can actually go and look at how we might wind up using the work that Gravity is doing to code those survey instruments and ultimately produce coded health concerns. So what we're doing is focusing on a comprehensive, we're calling it a risk assessment, and I know, Lucy, you have a concern with that term, and I've yet to update the slide, and I promise you I will before we do it again, where we start to look at a broader set of domains from a survey perspective and establishing the health concerns, and make that available so that we can start to go and use any number of survey instruments and have them appropriately coded and ultimately wind up coming together with a set of health concerns. And we'll show this graphically in a minute. Next slide, please. So if we think about what we have been doing, we have, and this is the kind of the use case flow, is we've been doing the assessment, or survey, we've created the health concerns, or it would certainly have with the work that's been done so far using ICD-10 and CM coding and some of the TT coding. We're looking at how we establish goals, length-based coded goals, and then ultimately using Summit CT and CPT HCPCS to go in and define intervention, coding those interventions, interacting with community-based organizations, and ultimately assessing outcomes. And then on the left, we're talking about how we aggregate or will aggregate and report that information or make it available for reporting. Next slide, please. So we've had the concept of these 19 domains as basically cars on a train. And so what we've done is we have, for food insecurity, we've pretty much loaded up the car, but we have 18 empty cars. And then we do housing instability. We load up another car. So what we're doing now is saying, well, we need to do something a little bit different. We need to, at least on the assessment side, be able to have something that really is available to load up all the cars. So we can at least get to the point where we can assess individuals' issues related to social determinants of health, and then make them available as health concerns in the clinical record, so we can start to think about how they interact with the clinical care process. And we continue the process of adding the rest of the use case terms that we're developing as we go through the full process. So while we develop them for housing instability, we add that. So we have a somewhat different picture of how we're approaching the overall problem of social determinants of health. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what we're doing now is we're also adding into here the consent process, so we understand what individuals are willing to go and have shared and with whom, which we did not have as part of the prior process. We had deferred that, held it off as a future goal. We've noted in here the community-based organizations that are going to wind up providing the ability to go in and deliver the interventions that we're defining, or that we're at least encoding. We're not defining them, they're already out there. We're just providing the ability to code them in a uniform way. And then ultimately to measure or survey for the outcomes. Next slide, please. So what we're doing is we're using the current work effort. We're continuing the process of developing the detailed work that Sarah has been leading, but we're partially reducing the focus on the exchange process for this first version of the implementation guide, which we're planning on taking to ballot in January. We're focusing on RESTful exchange methods, not all the possible exchange methods. We're using food insecurity as an example domain, but we're not using it as the total requirement for that particular implementation guide. So it won't be for food insecurity, it'll be framework for everything. Food insecurity is being used as an example. Next slide, please. We're redesigning the FIRE-G, as we said, to support multiple domains. We're working on a new FIRE method to allow for value sets to flex based on the domain requirements. So we don't have to go back and create a version of the implementation guide for housing, a version of the implementation guide for transportation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but rather have this base framework guide where we can have flexible value sets that, depending upon the domain you're trying to describe, you can have them flex based on the definition that comes out of, in particular, the survey process. So we're planning for support for multiple use cases. We're adding some additional ones in rather than the 3 that we had. We're looking at 5 now use cases. We've updated the project scope statement and the implementation guide request, both of which have been approved.
Bob,
Sorry?
Bob, this is Lucy. If I could interrupt you on the second bullet under number 1, survey instrument, what does that refer to?
If you can hold off for 1 second, we'll show you, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you.
I have another slide that'll walk you through that.
Okay.
We're representing basically the result of a survey instrument as a health concern, consistent with the work that has been done in establishing a U.S. CDI, which I believe Evelyn talked about a little bit earlier, where they're soliciting additional input from the community on the next version of the U.S. core data elements. Next slide, please. So we now have, we're doing the survey, we're creating health concerns, we're representing the social determinants of health goals as part of the social determinants of health care plan. We're representing social determinants of health interventions as requests for services from community-based organizations where appropriate. We're managing the request process and we're tracking the interventions to completion, measuring outcomes, reporting individual and aggregated data as appropriate, and managing consent to share. These will all be part of the implementation guide that will go to ballot in January. Next slide, please. This is the process that I believe, Lucy, you're asking about. What we're doing is starting a process of working with Reagan Street and Loink around the survey instrument definitions that they have. We're looking at how we can add into that either within the Reagan Street definitions or by pointing to something external, the algorithms that are necessary to go and create a FHIR-based questionnaire that has the logic to not just take a single question and its answers and express them as potentially a health concern, but rather to take multiple questions and the result of multiple questions, use some computational logic and express that result as a health concern. We are in the process of talking with NLM about updating some of the tooling that they have. They have a forms widget that can go and take the Loink definitions, survey definitions, and create this questionnaire. We'd like to go and enhance that so that we can not just create the questionnaire, but create the logic within it. As I said, ultimately on execution, create the resulting FHIR resources that we want to create. We're looking at trying to enhance the NLM SCC questionnaire application so that ultimately when you get done executing it, you create the questionnaire response, which is basically the questionnaire with all of the answers that have been given. We create a set of observations that are basically an observation related to the specific questionnaire and the linkages to all of the questions that were asked and their results, and then an observation for each of the question and the result. Where there are dependencies, we have a mechanism for creating the dependencies between the specific questions and answer pairs. And then ultimately creating the conditioned resource, or what are health concerns, expressed as both SNOMED CT and as ICD-10 CM. So that would be the common point. So if you have a survey that you already are using, the way you can drop it into the process that we're creating in the FHIR implementation guide is to have that survey link coded and become a Loink survey instrument. That then would run through the tooling that we're creating to go and take it all the way down to FHIR resources. So it won't matter particularly what survey you have, as long as you can link code it and in the process define health concerns as the outcomes from it. That will drop us into a standard process now that can be used by within the EHR to promote those health concerns, to problem list, or to diagnoses, and ultimately based on provider evaluation to establish goals and interventions based on other clinical findings as we're indicating here. So ultimately the outcome of each one of these needs to be a health concern using gravity-defined value sets. Lucy, does that answer your question on how we're looking at using multiple survey instruments?
Yes,
at
it
the
does.
boarding
And
house?
yes, it does. Thank you. And it evokes a few other questions when it's question time. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. We're working to let a contract create a reference implementation that basically takes the concepts I just covered and creates a implementation that is open source, that represents all of the elements that we just discussed and is available for people to use as a starting point for creating their own implementations, or something we can use in Connectathons to test against. It will basically have the ability to represent the exchanges that are implicated by the FHIR APIs that can express the various representations of social determinants of health data that would be part of the implementation guide. Next slide, please. This is the time frame for doing the first version of the implementation guide. We'll be developing it between now and December, going to ballot in January, which means it's a December-January ballot, doing ballot reconciliation with the intent of ultimately publishing it in roughly the May timeframe and making it an HL7 standard. We're showing the Connectathons, the one that Evelyn had talked about earlier, which is September. There'll be another one in January and in May. We're looking at doing the RI development to have it available for the January Connectathon. And then based on the reconciliation work we do, based on ballot comments on this implementation guide that will take the ballot in January, we'll update the reference implementation to include any updates or changes. So it would be a reference implementation of the published version of the standard for trial use 1. Next slide, please. I think that's it. And this is the Connectathon information again that Evelyn had presented earlier. Next slide, please. And I believe we're ready for questions. So,
Lucy,
questions
you have
from
a
anyone?
question.
Yeah. Hi, Bob. This is Ruth. And
Yes,
really, I agree wholeheartedly with the approach. Makes a lot of sense. Definitely aligns with how we have approached this. I can see how this strategy effectively deals with point of care concerns so that it's readily available, usable for the healthcare team and community-based resources who might be supporting referral needs. Can you talk a little bit about how this would work when you start thinking about moving this into analytics and predictive algorithms and possibly even research? That what I think I'm hearing you say is that any and all instruments or tools would be connected back to that, because there's a difference between an instrument and a tool and just text-based data that might be collected in the social history. And so my concern as a researcher is, will the data collected by multiple different tools, when it moves into a domain that is specifically relegated for research, and say there are 2 or 3 different organizations who have contributed data, how do we ensure that that data has the same meaning across instrument, tool, and text-based information?
You're asking an incredibly important question. What we're looking at doing is, as you know, with the work that Sarah is doing, they're taking multiple instruments that have been submitted, multiple questions related to each of those domains. And they are doing the work to go and provide link coding for the questions and the answers. We're looking at, and the result of that as a SNOMED or and ICD-10 coded health concern or diagnosis, depending upon where you are in that process of concern to problem to diagnosis. To the extent that we can do that coding, meaning provide standard link coding and standard representations of the health concerns, we'll have coded health concerns that we can work with. If the EHRs then also adopt the balance of what we're doing around goals and interventions, then you're going to wind up having the ability to, from the EHR and from community platforms that support the same coding mechanisms, to be able to have standard coded social determinants of health surveys, health concerns, goals, interventions, and outcomes. If we can get to that point, and it's a big if, then we would have the standardized coded information that would make the type of analytics work you want to do far simpler than trying to go back to textual information that's been collected as part of a narrative in the EHR or even as part of a narrative in a community-based platform.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Bob. And that's why at the end of the TAC meeting last week, I sent out a publication that really addresses just exactly what you've talked about with a 3-tier coding strategy that has already been reviewed and approved by LOINC. And we're in the process. We've already mapped codes from Prepare, from IOM, and from the WellRx tool to that strategy. So the LOINC codes should be forthcoming. And because we looked for each one of the 6 uses suggested by the National Academy of Medicine, the way the strategy works is it meets the use for all 6 of those suggested purposes. And it, I'm just putting it out there that this might be something that would support the overall efforts for Gravity because it's not proprietary. It's out there in the public space. And my understanding is that the codes, the LOINC codes to support the strategy are forthcoming in like the next release or the one after that. So it could just save some time.
Yep. No, I've got a copy of your paper. I will confess I haven't had the time to read it, but I think I can this weekend. And then we probably can have a more detailed conversation. Okay?
I know, isn't it awful that we use our holiday weekends for work that we love?
It's already planned, and it's a time when I can go and do the things that aren't involved with the 30-odd calls I have each week. So, yeah, it's an opportunity to go and learn from others. So, fantastic. Thank you, Ruth.
So, Bob, you have a question. You have a question from Richie in the chat. Can we join the FIRE meetings?
We're going to start them up probably right after the working group meeting, and yes, you can. The FIRE work group meetings are open. Right now, we're doing some initial architecture work to get the multi-domain version defined, and then we'll start having HL7 open meetings where anyone can join. Now, if you want to be able to vote, you'll have to join HL7, but and I mean on the ballot itself. And we encourage you to become an HL7 member, but yeah, she'll be able to join those calls. Other questions?
Yeah, Bob, this is Lucy. Could you please go back to the slide that's labeled Enabling Survey that enabling
Yep.
survey slide?
Well, I can't, but hopefully somebody else is driving can.
Yeah,
Right there.
that one. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think you said somewhere in here, somewhere in this sequence, if everyone could change whatever they're doing now to the LOINC language or terminology, then all of this can happen. Whose job
Yep.
is it to do that? Is that an EHR? Is this going to end up on the desk of the EHRs to reconcile whatever, to use Ruth's language, whatever tools are now being used and facilitated by the great number of EHRs that are out there? Are you
No,
implying? Okay, so who
no,
does
no.
that?
We
Whoever, more than likely, whoever owns or is the primary user of one of these tools would work with LOINC to code it. Once it's coded, it's available to every EHR. It's not an EHR by EHR thing. It's the same as laboratory testing. Okay, you establish LOINC codes for laboratory testing, and all the EHRs use them. So this is it's effectively a one and done. Once I have the LOINC coding, I have all of the questions and answers defined for a survey answer. For example, Prepare is already out there. Hunger Vital Signs is already out there. So that would be the foundation. What we're doing is adding to it the ability to put in computational logic. And the reason we have to have some computational logic in there is if you wind up having more than one question contribute to an outcome, okay, meaning contribute to a health concern, then we need to have the way of expressing that. Because ultimately what happens is that logic, through the tooling we're looking at creating, would be converted into a FHIR questionnaire. The FHIR questionnaire would get executed either through the NLM SBC survey tool, which will enhance, or you can take that same logic and put it into somebody else's platform and execute it. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is say that if you define your survey instrument as a LOINC panel with the additional computational logic that we define, how you would do that, then we can run it all the way through the tooling that we're creating and ultimately have it create FHIR questionnaire response, the observations that are necessary, and the health concerns as condition resources. And that would become the standard representation inside of any FHIR platform, if you will. Does that make sense?
But I'm still not. I'm a provider, and whether I'm in this meeting or not, I eventually hear about all this, and I'm thrilled at the potential for language to become more common among everybody I know and usable for all the uses I can think of. So I'm a provider, and I see this slide, and you keep saying you can do. I'm a provider. Who do I call, or who do I say this has to be done now?
So I think I can help. So this is Sarah here. So the simple answer is us. Because no, wait. So hold on, wait, just wait 1 second. Because not in the future, but right now, what I want to remind the community of, and is that our work with developing the screening and question tab, collating the questions we ask and the answers we come up with, that next step is to build those panels into LOINC, and we work very closely with registry. So it's on our directive. It's in our work to be done to take the concepts that we're suggesting to within the Gravity community and build those concepts into LOINC, right? So the USDA screeners are already built as part of the June release. We're working on some of the other comprehensive screeners now. So that needs to be noted, that that's part of what Gravity takes on, is that labor on behalf of the community.
We need to be a little careful here. This is talking about something beyond what we're doing. This is taking somebody else's survey instrument. For example, the one that has been created by CMS, and getting that survey instrument represented, not what we do around each domain, but that survey instrument. So what we've done is we basically said, if you have a survey instrument you've created or are using, it can be represented in LOINC and driven through the entire tooling set that we're creating. Yes, we'll do ours, but this could be an external instrument that's not something that we are taking responsibility for.
Oh, yeah, so Bob, I'm sorry.
Process.
I might be a little bit confused. I think it might be a little bit confusing because I'm talking about the two. So there's the future work to be done, but for instance, right now we're working with the accountable health community with CMS and AHC to build the LOINC tool in right now, right? So we do accept as part of our work the responsibility for taking the tools that the community has suggested and working with Registry as able to put forward. That we've worked over the summer to get permissions as able, and this is Linda can attest to this better than most. But so, and beyond that, for those individuals who want to understand how to build their own tools into LOINC, we do have amazing partners within Registry. I don't know if Sarah Armson's on the call, but it's not quite as it's. They do a lovely job walking individuals through. But for right now, that is part of Gravity's work as it stands as part of our terminology work. And Linda was working incredibly hard on that.
Well, I want to thank you both and explain that the reason for these questions, which may not be very well formulated, is that I know that a lot of the EHR community now is focused on implementing the latest CMS rule respecting ADT. So I'm just trying to understand that what we're doing here is not going to land on the desks of the EHR in the time frame that Bob suggested, at the same time that they're working so hard to implement this ADT rule. So am I understanding this?
Yes and no. Most of this is external tooling that's not an EHR will not be developing. What they have to do is have the ability to go and consume the observation and condition resources as part of FIRE R4. And then any instrument that produces those will be available to an EHR. So we're not trying to get an EHR by EHR solution. They have to be able to
of course not. No, of course it's not EHR specific, but it is a capability or a function that EHRs will need to incorporate in their current products.
Yeah, I wonder,
Exactly.
Lucy, I think that actually segues so Lucy, I'm sorry. I think you are actually speaking to something that other individuals in the chat are saying as well, right? Because I think there's some implementation and bandwidth questions. So there's the question from, and again, Lucy, if this is not actually in line with what you're saying, I'm sorry, but Rita asks, can Bob or the Gravity team speak more about what's involved with implementing FIRE questionnaires? And that seems similar in line, Lucy, to maybe what you're asking as well, which is about like taking these things and actually implementing them. Is that fair to say, Lucy?
Yes.
Okay. So Bob, can you help answer Rita's question as well? What's involved with implementing a FIRE questionnaire?
So the question is, are you asking how you execute one or how you create one?
How you, I hear it as execute, because so Lucy was talking about labor of building, but I hear Rita, and Rita, maybe you can unmute yourself, talking about implementation, and this would make sense given how I know given how I know Rita works on the ground. So maybe Rita can unmute herself and speak to that.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I'm really talking more, as Sarah said, from the ground perspective, with like community health centers that may not have like the R4, version of fire implemented, and may, and like what if they were to even consider or contemplate doing something like this, like what would be your guidance to actually move in that direction in terms of what they would need to do?
Well, like I said, we're working with NLM on the tooling they have, which can be used to go and administer or execute a fire questionnaire. It can also be used to create one. So what we're doing, and you'll see this in the demonstrations we'll do during the Connect-a-thon, we have the ability to go and take a survey instrument in LOINC, use NLM tooling to go and create a fire questionnaire, and then use more tooling that the NLM has to go and execute that questionnaire. In other words, to ask the question, gather the responses, and create the output. Now, is that something you can necessarily use in production? No, but it is open source and a good starting point that others can go and create standalone applications that can do this for you. The output of that is intended to be basically what's called a bundle, a fire bundle, that has the result of that survey as a series of observations and concerns that can be consumed by an EHR. The EHR has to have the ability to do that. There's no way to get around that, okay? The EHR is going to have to do some development work to be able to go and bring that into their internal representation of a observation or a problem list, if you will. So there's going to be work on the part of the EHR, there's no doubt about it. But we're going to go and have a standardized way to represent surveys, execute surveys, and create the output that they need to consume. Does that make sense?
Mostly, not completely. That's okay. But I may have other questions that relate to that, but go on, that's fine.
No, go ahead.
So say like some sites, they may use in some way like the prepare tool to capture, certain type of assessment information. Mm-hmm. Although they may not use it in the way that, that is ideal. Or they may not use any at all. I mean, and they're not even using anything that relates to fire. And so it would definitely involve having the EHRs probably do development or upgrade something if they don't have that capability already. But if they were to want to like, and do something like this, even though they may not even have it in their like vision or roadmap to do it, but if it's something that they're trying to do or would want to do in the future, it would be probably helpful to like also have some kind of like guidance as to like how to get there, like a glide path between like having,
Yeah, I think you'll see. I agree with you, and I think the way we're envisioning both the implementation guide and the tooling that we're, like I said, work on with NLM. We're envisioning that there will be the instructions on how to use that tooling and how to implement it. The real question becomes how tightly you're going to couple this into the EHR. If you're coupling it really tightly, then you're going to have to do more integration. If it's somewhat loose, meaning you're going to execute these surveys in a different platform, and then just take the results of it and make it part of the EHR, the coupling becomes less tight. It just depends upon your particular implementation of an EHR and the way you do your workflow. So I don't know if there's a single answer.
And Rita, and I don't know if this is a little bit cart before the horse, but I actually see your questions as relating to Lucy's implementation questions and piloting questions that she was asking earlier, right? So one of the things that we are continually asking ourselves is how to solve common problems across the diverse needs and infrastructure capacities of all of our different community members. So
Well,
this is heavily.
What we're doing here is we're creating a common representation that can be used for any SUH survey. So it's one thing you have to implement as an EHR. You don't have to implement one for each different type of survey. And for those that are doing survey administration, you don't have to have a different way of talking to every EHR. So we can have one representation that has to be implemented, there's little doubt about it, but you only have to implement one. That's been part of what we've been trying to accomplish all along, is making sure that we have one way of defining the LOINC codes, one LOINC code that's defined for a particular thing, or one way of defining a particular health concern. Again, one way of defining the outcome of a survey instrument, the output of a survey instrument that can be used by an EHR. None of this says you can do it for free, meaning, and I'm not talking costs, I'm talking about implementation effort. So you're still going to have to implement something. There's little doubt about that. And we'll go through that as part of what we do in the Connectathon next week. We'll have a reference implementation for it by January and the Connectathon there. At that point, people that are interested, EHR vendors, community organizations, they can test their tooling against it, their process. They can look at what we've created, and they can look at how they might want to adopt it and implement it in their environment. Does that make sense?
Yes, and before we're so close to the end, there's a really tangible question from Art about what common vocabulary will be used to define health concerns or goals.
It's the vocabulary that's being created right now by Gravity as part of the process that Sarah has.
So far, I believe, but I guess what is so within the build, right? So goals are LOINC, correct? Right?
Goals of the LOINC. The health concerns are the work you've already done, right?
So, but are they SNOMED or are they LOINC? I think I don't know if that's what Art's asking.
The health concerns are intended to be SNOMED CT and ICD-10, and the goals will be LOINC.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that was clear. I don't know if that level of granularity was what you were asking, but it's an easy, it's a concrete answer. So, and then Ruth has a very technical question that perhaps we should consider as we're doing our testing in Connectathon. So Ruth has a very technical question about how you address an instrument that uses 4 questions and is scored into 3 categories. So Ruth,
that's what the computational logic is for.
Yeah,
that's exactly the intent. Okay, so you would define that as part of coding your survey instrument and define, and we'll have a standard for that. Define the computational logic that says, if I have 4 questions and I need 3 health concerns, then here's the logic behind it to go and create that health concern. What else do we have here?
So I do want to state that these are some of we have 1 minute left. So maybe we can answer these final questions, but just to wrap up, I don't know if we do want to make sure that we remind folks of the community homework, and we do have opportunities to engage in this work through the Connectathon next week, correct? Oh my God.
Yep. Let me do one other thing before we adjourn. I want to thank the folks at the AMA who have worked tirelessly to help make these changes and to get set up for the Connectathon next week. Monique, Corey, Jim, and then Lloyd McKenzie from Jevity has been our constant companion, keeping us on track with the, shall we say, the more the less obvious details of fire and making sure that we do it right. So I want to thank them because without their help, we would not have got to where we are.
So,
And we look,
yeah, no, Bob, you want to do a final technical comment, and then I'll close this out with our last.
no, I just wanted to say that we look forward to seeing each and every one of you that wishes to participate at the Connect-a-thon next week, and we can continue on with these conversations and look at detail of where we are with the implementation guide and look at some concrete examples of how this would work, because Monique and the others have created some concrete examples of how we can go, and Joey from Jevity also has been involved and created some concrete examples to show this flow as real code and real examples and real visuals.
Thank you so much. And I think this is just an example of how many considerations there are in this work. Thank you so much, Bob, for taking the helm. Again, please do join the Connect-a-thon next week if you can, and the working groups that Bob is setting up to do and analyze this work and make sure it's done right. Just a last closing moment. Our meeting is come to an end. We used our whole 90 minutes. We were early in the beginning, and we definitely consumed the time talking about this technical work. Thank you, Bob. A reminder of the homework to do. So you can always catch up on all the different elements on the Confluence. Vote on the housing instability and homelessness data set, submitting new concepts for inadequate housing and transportation. And not on the slide, but because I forgot actually, is submitting comments on the Gravity data principles, which are posted on the Confluence and available for download. And we are so grateful for your time.
So thank you everyone for your input. Really appreciate it. And Sarah, thank you very much for driving this.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.